to Dead Headspace. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everyone.
And today we are joined by editor, author, and many, many more things. Elle Turpitt. Say hi, Elle.
Hi, Elle.
And this is a fun one because we get to talk to another team member of Deadhead Reviews. For those that are new to the program, Deadhead Reviews is a review platform run by myself, Elle Turpitt, and Ellen Afigliano. Let's start with the base question, Elle. What got you into horror?
So as a kid, I was actually terrified of everything. But my brothers kind of forced me to watch whatever games they were playing. They were playing Resident Evil, a board game called Atmosphere. And they'd make me sit in the room with them. And then as I got older, I kind of started, I picked up the Goosebumps books, I picked up the point horror books. And then the first horror film I sat through was The Others. And then just watched that and went, well, that wasn't that scary. But I want something that will actually scare me. And I've been looking for something like that ever since, really.
That was a creepy movie. I don't know if that was the twist that was common for a lot of movies before it, but when you find out what's actually happening in that movie, good God.
I think I was about 11, 12, and it blew my mind. And I remember my friends jumped when a candle got blown out and they were covering their eyes and I'm just sitting there that is amazing.
I can't remember where that took place, but I feel like it wasn't in America. Do you remember where it was?
I can't remember. I know it was it Nicole Kidman?
It was, yeah.
I feel like it might have been Britain, possibly.
I feel it was Britain too.
And I'd be guessing at the year, but I think it was around 97 or so. It was within a few years of The Sixth Sense. And, maybe I'm misremembering just because of the age I was around then. In 97, I'd have been 12. But I do feel like that whole need for a twist kind of took off after, that period in movies. And now I'm beating myself over the head. I'm like, was that prevalent and I just didn't notice it before The Sixth Sense? Or did that movie come out and every other filmmaker said, oh shit, now I've got to do that too, in order to kind of gain that audience?
I just seen Patrick's background change. That's awesome. Yeah, The Others was 2001. But I think you're right. I think Sixth Sense kind of created a wave of twists in stories. But I think ghost stories are built for that as well. And I didn't actually see The Sixth Sense until I was at university. And I was the only one in the class who hadn't seen it because we did Hollywood horror. So Sixth Sense was one of the films we watched, and the lecturer was like, has anyone here not seen it? I was the only one put my hand up. And she was like, I won't spoil the ending then. I know the ending. Who doesn't know it at this point? The film's been out 15 years.
The spoiler on the spoiler warning on the ending on that one definitely had a short shelf life. I mean, you had to see that, or somebody was going to tell you, and it was, it definitely makes for a more interesting, first hour and a half of the movie. But there's no substitute for seeing it for the first time, having that reveal. If you're like me, I don't know about you guys, but I am absurdly bad at figuring out twists and reveals and things where there are clues sprinkled throughout the film and I'm supposed to, put two and two together. And I kind of always look at that where if I like the notion that if there's a twist, the rest of the story needs to be done well, as well. But you can't just rely on the twist. But at the same time, I always feel like if I can figure it out, you made it way too obvious. You beat the audience over the head with it.
Yeah.
What about you guys? Are you more clever than I am?
I can't. I'm terrible at working them out. Sometimes I can work it out, and then it makes me feel really good because I'm like, yes, I worked it. I got it. But it's a big reason why I don't really write crime and thrillers. Because I can't see it in someone else's work. I don't think I'd be very good at plotting it in my own. with crimes as well, where you've got to connect every single little dot.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you guys. Like, I remember when I saw Saw for the first time, and after we watched it, when Tobin Bell's character stands up, I'm like, holy shit. One of my friends was like, saw that coming. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. Are you kidding me? Are you serious?
Watching films with Rich is like that. And he'll try and like guess things as well. Yeah. So if I'm watching something with him that I've seen and he hasn't, I've really got to have like a really good poker face to not be like, yeah, you got it. I'm just like, I'm not telling you.
That's the interesting about talking to writers about movies and shows. Like when, I'm sorry to beat a dead horse, but like Game of Thrones season 8, I was looking at it through the eyes of a writer. I'm like, why would this not have a closed off ending, some kind of satisfaction? Like, do you guys experience that with writer friends compared to non-writer friends and maybe movies or shows that they pick up on things because they create stories for fun compared to the ones that don't?
Yeah, I think sometimes I do. Like sometimes, like if I'm watching a film with my dad or with Rich or whatever, I feel like sometimes they might get a little bit more enjoyment out of it, whereas I'm that little bit more critical. Like there's loads, like Rich can watch all the terrible like Sharknadoes or Mega Shark or any of those Sci-Fi Channel films, and sometimes enjoying it, and sometimes I'm just like, I can't. The dialogue is just terrible. And I think as well, when I went to university, like there was a difference. So when I did creative writing, the girls who weren't doing creative writing all loved Twilight. The girls who were doing creative writing all seemed to hate it, which was really interesting. Because I think like all of us had been writing as like teenagers and stuff, and trying to learn how to write then, and then going to study it. And I think even when you start writing at a young age, you develop that critical eye.
Yeah, absolutely. What'd you go to university for?
I did creative writing and American studies.
That's interesting. So, what was your experience like? Did you meet anyone that you became friends with or pen pals with, or if that's even a thing anymore?
Yeah, like I haven't spoken to them for ages, but I made really good friends at university. The girls who I did creative writing with were all amazing. My friend who I did American studies with, Hannah, she went out to Kansas during my third year, because if you do American studies, you get to go and study for a year in America, unless you're doing joint, which is what I was doing. So like all my American studies friends disappeared in the third year, and I was just stuck at Hull, which is up in the north of England. So basically, if it's Winterfell is the best way I can describe it.
I've heard that.
In the winter, it's just like it's snow everywhere.
Author Lex H. Jones told me that's where he's from. I believe his accent's northern.
Yeah.
And he said it's Winterfell. I've noticed talking to people from the UK, all mainly England and now Wales, thanks to you, is we stole a lot of town names from you, like Hull, or you mentioned a town named Margate, which I'm in New Jersey. Margate's right near me. Hull is a place it could be other states, but Massachusetts is a beach town where I almost drowned when I was 12 with my sister, and I always associate that as hell because I, again, almost died there. And I just find it interesting that there's stolen names about everything, like Plymouth. That's a port in England. As an editor, we can go back and break it down how you got started in that. But do you see things from, let's say, American writers that you notice that's kind of either, one, ignorant to global markets, two, that maybe is super noticeable? Can you spot an English or a Welsh or name any other European writer over an American for the most part?
I think with English-speaking countries, you can spot American writers versus British writers. So two of my best club. Well, I say best, the ones who come to me all the time. S.H. Cooper and JSQ. So Sarah lives in Florida, Joe lives in South England. You can definitely see the difference. Even obviously there's a lot of things that are spelled differently as well. But even just turns of phrase, like I'll switch my word to American English just so I can double check stuff, because obviously if I'm looking at colour, we have a U in it, you guys don't. Theatre is spelled different. Really basic words like that. But even beyond that, like when I'm when I'm getting critiques of people, you can tell who is American, because normally the American critiquers will point out things as wrong that aren't wrong, whereas British or whatever, the critiquers will maybe have a tendency to look stuff up first. So I think, what was it the other day? I said something about in the bay, and all the American critiquers were like, no, it's by the bay, or all this, it's not in. So even like the way you use different words and stuff is a massive difference between American and British.
Okay.
But I find it really interesting because I love seeing the differences. So like you said, New Jersey, you live in New Jersey. Jersey is an island off the coast of England. You do so I think it comes from people just naming it after their hometowns when they arrive there. So like in Australia, you've got New South Wales. Perth is in Scotland, places like that. But you guys say like Edinburgh, you say it differently. So you have to like adjust your pronunciation depending on where you're speaking about Edinburgh in Scotland or somewhere. Like when you guys say, because how do you guys say it, like Edinburgh?
It depends, I guess, what part of the country.
I just straight up don't say it because I know I'm going to be wrong.
One of my favorite things to do is if you're on YouTube, there's like Americans trying to pronounce British place names, Americans trying to pronounce Welsh words. That is always really fun.
That one's tough for me because you've said words that I just feel like I would butcher, even after you tell me. Like, what's that word? Quatch?
Kutch.
Which is basically a hug.
Yeah, it's so the literal translation is a safe place.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
The idea is a kutch is a bit more than a hug. It's more meaningful. There's a saying that only the Welsh can kutch. Like everyone can hug, but only the Welsh can kutch. So if you speak to a Welsh person, you say, I'm going to give you a hug, they'll say, no, give me a kutch.
Have you guys read The Giver?
Yes.
No.
Oh, it's a great book. It's a court. There's 4 of them, but they're in the same universe, but they're not all directly connected. The Giver is basically a story where it's this through the eyes of this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brennan. A 12-year-old boy. He is in a world where it's literally like black and white. You take your pills. I forget what time of the day. Everything's routine. Words are precise. You say what you mean. You don't say, I'm starving to indicate that you're hungry. And that's an example from the book where the parents say you're not actually starving. And I forget exactly what they say, but when you reach the age of 12, or I think it's 12, you are assigned a job that you're going to have forever. Some women are birthers, some guys are whatever, but there's one person that holds all the information of what the world was like before everything. Like there's no pain because I think there's like medication for that. But basically there's one person called the Giver, and he's at the point in his life where he needs to pass that knowledge on to someone, and that's this main character. And slowly, because it's a lot to take in, slowly he can see images of this like sled, for example, and he sees snow, and he's like so fascinated. He sees colors. He can tell his friends and mom and dad about it. Doesn't matter because they don't know what that is. I'm definitely getting off track because I love that story, so I got lost in it. But my only point of bringing this up was the precision of words. It's a point that the parents try to make to the son, and I think that, at least from my experience in America, I can't speak for other parts of the world, like the word love. It just, like my wife or my friends, yeah, I know it means they mean it when they say it, but I feel like people misuse or overuse words that should mean a lot, like love or hate, for example. I'm just curious if in your editing experience or reading experience, if you've noticed that as a trend with people.
I wouldn't think so. Like, I think writers are very much aware of the value of words. I have noticed, like, speaking to you and Alan, or, you know, speaking to people on social media, I do think Americans are a lot more liberal with the words they use than British people are. So, like, even stuff like, yeah, saying I love you, you guys seem much more free with that than, like, we would over here. And I think that's kind of, I've adopted some of that as well. Even the way, like, I've noticed Americans, you'll all say brother.
Yeah, I say that a lot, and I'm going to be honest, not sure why I started that.
Randy Macho Man Savage, I bet.
I was never into wrestling. No, I never got into wrestling. I know a lot of friends growing up, even in preschool. I remember a friend just had all these wrestling action figures to ring. I'm like, I want to play Sega Genesis. Like, fuck this.
Oh, my brothers used to practice their wrestling moves on me, so that's my most experience with wrestling, is them holding their arm out and going, come here, run at me. No, just run at me. And then the other one kind of, grabbing me and just throwing me at the other one. So that was always fun. Because they're 5 years older than me. So the time they were getting into wrestling, it was very easy to just pick me up and just throw me around. So yeah, that was always fun.
So let's talk about your all-around package of editing services, beta reading. Can you break all that down for us?
Yeah, so probably around not long before I joined Deadheads last year, I set up a beta reading service on Fiverr, and I started doing it. Did really well with it. Loads of work. I think there was one point where I wasn't doing my own writing for ages because I was just working, saving up money because we went to Disneyland Paris in November. So like all that money I was saving up. But from speaking to different people through doing that, what the feedback I got was that it was more editing than beta reading. So, or beta, or however you say it. So that's when I set up my own website during lockdown. I separated the Fiverr gigs. So I've now got a beta reading and an editing gig. So the beta reading gig now is, I'll make a few inline comments. I'll give a reader report that just has comments on like characters, world building, if that's needed, or plot description. Whereas the editing is more what I was doing before, where it was, going through checking spelling, checking grammar, checking the flow, whether or not it flows well, that sort of thing. And it's been really good. I mean, I've done 3 books for S.H. Cooper now. I've done partial full novels through Fiverr before. I've done loads of short stories for JSQ. And it's really good. Like, it's something I really enjoy. And obviously I do the editing for Deadheads as well. So that's basically just going through the reviews or the articles and just checking for grammar, spelling, flow, making sure it all reads well. But to be fair, you guys the team make it really easy for that, because the most I do is take out maybe a couple of extra that's and stuff, you know. I think the team overall, like, they all write really well. So yeah, that bit's easy.
Those are all my that's, by the way, so I apologize. You probably got a whole bag over there.
it's probably the thing I do most comment it through across the board, and it's one thing every single writer I speak to, I'm like, stop using that. Stop. Just delete it. Read the sentence. If it makes sense without the word that, it can be deleted.
I definitely want to come back to. I read an article or an essay or whatever you would call it that you wrote about killer words and filler words, and I'd love to talk about that. But before we go in that direction, one of my follow-up questions for your editing services, you already kind of took it on. I think it was so important, both from a new author's perspective, but also from somebody who's being asked to beta read about what those expectations are. Both if I send something off and ask somebody out of the, whether I'm paying them or out of the goodness of their heart, asking the beta read, like what I can reasonably expect that to entail versus editing. And I wonder if you could expand, for new writers on the different types of editing, because people kind of seeking out those services can find that, the price range for editing it's a big range. So if you could take us kind of through the difference between line editing and other different types of services people might want to enlist for stories versus novels.
Yeah, so line editing is like, so you got developmental copy and line editing. Developmental is like a big picture editing, so it's looking at the plot, it's looking at sort of other plot holes, is there anything you do with the characters, that sort of thing. Line editing is sort of going through checking the spelling, grammar, making sure words flow, that sort of thing. Whereas copy editing is that, but it's even more in depth. So copy editing will require checking. It's almost like a more in-depth version if you combine. This is my understanding of it anyway. If you combine developmental and line editing, so with copy editing, you normally have to also check, like if you're writing historical fiction, the copy editor will check historical facts. The copy proofreading as well is different again, because proofreading will be sort of the next stage before it's actually published, so checking formatting errors, stuff like that. Copy editing is probably the most, from what I've seen, it tends to be the most expensive because it's the most time consuming. It's the one where you would be checking sort of name spellings or place names. If you had a British author who was writing something set in America or vice versa, you check, does that actually make sense? Are they using the right dialogue for a British character? I think it's the copy editor as well. So like if you have a separate publisher in the UK and the US, they might change the spelling of words, or they might change the use of words to match. So they'll change jumper to sweater, things like that. Which if I'm editing and it's a character, American writing a British character or British person writing an American character, I'll check for those things as well. Even though what I do is more like line editing. I just try and do the best that I can, sort of, if that makes sense. Like someone's paying for it. I'm self-taught as well, so I don't currently have the qualifications to say, hey, I'm an expert at this. But like with the better reading, that was one approach I took. I kind of went above and beyond because I saw it as people are paying me for something that you could probably get for free. But I will say with better reading, I think one of the best things you can do with better reading is think that, right, if I'm asking someone to do this, maybe you ask it as an exchange. Like, oh, if you can read this story for me, I can read one of yours, blah, blah, blah. If you're not paying for it, I've seen authors have said that they'll send their better readers copies of the book once it's published, or buy them a little gift or something like that. So it's not like something else that you don't have to charge for it at all, but there should be some sort of investment, whether it's your time, kind of an exchange of services or whatever it is. Yeah, I might have rambled a bit there, but
no, that's all good. And when we post the episode, I definitely want to kind of make it clear that one of the target audience points on this, especially this aspect of the conversation, is basically people getting into this. And the whole reason that I accepted Patrick's oh so generous invitation to co-host this show was so that I could ask people questions that I directly benefit from. But people who are kind of new to writing, who have one foot in the door, but they're not 100% sure what to do. So, I mean, in that vein, you see, and I'm not putting myself in this camp, but you see a lot of people who are opposed to editing. And some of that could definitely be the price tag. And that could be directly related to, they don't understand, like you said, how much work a copy edit would entail. Really kind of poring over that manuscript line by line, word by word, because I would imagine that, looking for spelling errors and checking to see how it flows, like, you're not doing that in one fell swoop. You can't read a sentence once and say, I've got everything. Again, that's my imagination. I don't edit, so I, would have other people do that. But for, obviously, we want people to enlist the services of Elle Turpitt if they are looking for an editor. But if they were to go in another direction, can you recommend things they should look for in an editor or steer away from as red flags?
So one thing I'll say is if people are looking at the traditional publishing route, like getting an agent, they don't need a professional editor. They need feedback. Every writer needs feedback of some sort. Whether it's a writing group or online or whatever it is. It's the same if you're looking to submit short stories to places. You can, of course, because you can, if you want to invest that, you can. But you don't need a professional editor for that, because that will get edited. That will all be handled. Traditional publishing, the books go through they go through like multiple stages of editing. If you're looking to self-publish, get an editor, invest in that. You're putting yourself out there. And some people think, oh, I'm fine, I can self-edit. I would never, ever just rely on my own opinion. I have my own sort of channels, if that makes sense. So I'm on the website Scribophile, which is where you critique other people's work and you get feedback on it. That's how I get mine done. But you have to critique so many before you can post your own. So you have to get like 5 karma points to post one extract or chapter or whatever it is. But I would never ever look at a piece of work and go, oh, well, I'm the only person who's seen this, it's perfect. Because there's stuff that I've sent to friends who have looked at it and gone, oh, hang on, this doesn't make sense. And it's something that I've read the story 5 or 6 times and wouldn't have picked up on. So yeah. In terms of red flags, I'm not entirely sure. Always check the prices, because there's society. So in the UK, you've got a Society of Proofreaders and Editors. Might be the other way around. But they have details of what the minimum pricing is that editors charge. So I think a lot of editors will charge over that because they're more experienced, they're more qualified, they might be quicker. Yeah, I would say I offer a sample as reading as well. So if people want to send me a 500-word sample, because I think that gives enough that I can say, I can use it. It doesn't take me too long to do 500 words, but it gives the author, the writer, an idea of what I can do. This hasn't happened yet, but it also means that if they've sent me something and I can't find a single error in it, then do they actually need a professional editor, or do they just need better reading or feedback or critiquing or something else? But I think what you find most times that once that feedback comes back, I might send it back to someone and they might then take that advice from the 500-word sample, apply it to the rest of the manuscript before they send it to me, or they might just send me the rest of the manuscript. Either way is fine. But I think as well that feedback, whatever form it comes in, whether it's editing or critiquing or better reading, can help you in future projects as well. So it's not just this only applies to this one single story that I've submitted. It's, oh, hang on, this is picked up that this is something that I do a lot. Can I change that for the next story I do or the next book? But yeah, that's one thing I will say about it. If you're going down the traditional publishing route, if you're looking at agents, you don't need professional editing. If you're self-publishing, maybe if you go into indie publishers, even though they have their own editors, I think indie publishers probably want something that's more polished already. I don't know. There's probably something to ask one of them. But I think, yeah, definitely self-publishing, hire an editor. Anything else, just make sure you get the feedback before you submit your work.
Okay, cool. That's great advice there. And to piggyback on this whole section, what advice do you have for also new writers? Because what I've seen it happens all the time. From the time I started writing, which I was in this camp until I realized, like, it's not personal, to now, I see all the time people, posting negative reviews and getting all upset about it, or people just getting all mad and it's ruining their day, which in my opinion, I don't get it, because as all three of us know, reviews aren't meant for anyone but potential readers. But what do you have for advice for new writers about negative comments, or quote unquote negative comments, ones that don't favor their work for one reason or another?
Don't read reviews.
That's a great comment.
I know it's hard because I've gone to check reviews of books I've edited and then seen a negative review and just been like, well, that's ridiculous because this book is amazing, it's the best thing ever. But and I've done it for anthologies I've been in, I've gone back to check reviews and stuff. But I think what my big idea is, if you have someone you trust, ask them to check reviews on your book. Ask them to go through it and literally just give you the positive ones. Because I think, as well as that, as a reviewer, there's a difference between me saying, oh my god, this book is terrible, I would never ever recommend it to everyone, why did they even bother picking up a pen? I wouldn't say something like that. That is harsh, because at the end of the day, as much as we say authors shouldn't check reviews, authors do check reviews. But there's a difference between saying that and saying, look, this book wasn't for me, the writing wasn't great, there were typos or there were spelling errors or whatever it is. There's a difference between being explaining why you disliked a book compared to just saying, I hated this book. But yeah, authors just take a step back. One star review on Amazon isn't going to hurt you. The same as 1 2-star review. 3-star reviews on Goodreads. 3 stars means you liked it. It's not a bad review. So if a 3-star book isn't saying this book is terrible, it's saying I liked it, it just wasn't amazing. There's books I read that I didn't think were very good, and sometimes on my blog, this hasn't happened for a while because I've had a really good streak with books, but sometimes I write little slight ranty reviews on my blog because I'm just like, this book really frustrated me. But I wouldn't tag the author in that. Reviewers, stop tagging authors in negative reviews.
Yeah.
I wouldn't tag the author in a review that isn't 100% glowing. But at the same time, not every review I write is 100% glowing. Not every book you read is going to be a 5-star. Not every book someone writes is going to be a 5-star. I might read a book and put it at 3 stars and then decide I'm still going to read stuff from that author. Because you see something in it that you think, okay, well, they might need a bit of development. Self-publishing, there's always going to be errors that slip through the cracks. But yeah, if you are self-publishing it, if you are publishing it through an indie publisher or whatever it is, just don't read reviews. I don't think Stephen King or Anne Rice or Joe Hill sit there combing Goodreads looking at the people who have criticised their books. They don't, and there's no need to. And what annoys me as well is authors saying, well, this review should be constructive. Why? You know, if one reviewer says details, like gives a constructive review, that's not the point for constructive criticism. The point for constructive criticism is before the book is published. Once it's published and out in the world, you have to let it go.
Yeah, because what it comes down to is other people's opinion. I mean, I already thought about this too, and I agree with you. Whenever I get a published book, right now, obviously things could change. My mindset is don't read a single review unless like someone tags you on Twitter and it's a friend. Then I'll check it out. Because otherwise, I don't know about you two, but with me, things sit in my head for a long time, and I'm like, I could be using this time to talk with my friends, could be with my family, could be writing or reading. Like, it's wasted energy in my eyes. What about you, Brandon? What do you think of all this?
The biggest thing that kind of jumps out to me is, at first I was almost not going to disagree with you about the constructive criticism thing, but kind of just say, I think it's good to put something positive. And then I realized that what I'm thinking of is not necessarily constructive criticism or construction at all, because I don't necessarily have the expertise to read a book and say, okay, here are the 5 things that would make this thing a masterpiece. I don't have the expertise or the arrogance to put up a review that says that. What my mind was jumping to was basically putting forth positive highlights and saying, I didn't care for this book, or it wasn't for me, it didn't resonate with me, choose your, cliched phrase, but saying, here's who would like it, or if you are interested in this, here's what's done well, here's what's strong. And I've found there are not really a lot of books that I've read and reviewed in the last, X number of months/years that have no redeeming qualities, that I can't find something to say, this didn't work for me, but if you're interested in it, here's what I liked, I guess. Here's what I would put forth as the strong points of this story.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think there's something that some people forget as well. It's just because you didn't like a book doesn't mean that it's not going to be... Like, I've seen books on Goodreads that someone has rated 2 or 3 stars, and I've gone, I need to read that book. There's books that, guys in the team rate 3 stars or 3.5 stars, and I've seen what they disliked about it, and it might be exactly what I like. I think that's important to remember as well. Even a so-called negative review could sell another reader on that book. But it just means that, if I follow someone who I know they're reading interest line of mine, if they don't dislike the book, I probably won't like it. But the people I'm friends with on Goodreads or on Twitter, we don't have the exact same taste. And I think you're right. I think it is important to say, here's some positives. This is why someone else might like it. But I personally didn't care for this aspect or that aspect. I don't think any review needs to depend on the book. I don't think a lot of the times a review doesn't have to be completely and utterly negative, unless it is some of these authors put out books that are just an excuse to write a fantasy, their own special fantasy, and it's full of graphic descriptions of whatever. In which case, yeah. Some people self-publish books that should never see the light of day.
Agreed.
And to be honest, that's on them then. If they've put it out into the world, that's on them. But even then, there's probably still going to be one slight small point in it that someone will like.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm going to kick myself because I can't think of who to attribute this to, but I remember whether it was somebody we talked to or somebody on a different podcast talking about basically writing characters who maybe, have tones of racism about them. That is, the character is racist, not that the book is written in a way that's offensive, but, characters that have undesirable traits. And the person I'm thinking of basically said you're going to see that stuff worked into stories, especially horror, where we kind of dissect the worst of the worst and, people who are just genuinely not good people. It's when you can tell that the views are no longer that of the character, and you can tell that they are that of the author. That you could cross that line from either constructive criticism or here's who I think would like this book to fuck this guy. Because let's face it, it's a guy.
No. I mean...
No, wait. It's a white guy. That's all I want to say. Sorry, I'll go ahead.
When I read The Fourth Whore by E.V. Hunt...
Knight.
Why am I thinking Hunt? That book...
C.V. Hunt.
That's right. E.V. Hunt. E.V. Knight, C.V. Hunt.
Gotcha.
And I've two of her books I've just listened to on Audible. C.V. Hunt. Yeah, Fourth Whore. If that book was written by a white guy, I would have thrown it across the room. As it was, I read it in February, and it's still one of those powerful books I read this year. And I was invited to the virtual launch of that as well. And that book is amazing, but it's brutal. And yes, if that had been written by a white guy, my reaction to it would have been extremely different. Which is why as well that I disagree with people who say, I don't care about this author's race or sexuality or whether they're male. I don't care. It's just good writing. It's like, yeah, but where they come from in their life is going to affect how they write certain things. I can't write about black characters in the American South. I don't tend to use slurs in my writing. And I think there's a difference between a woman writing a book that uses the words whore and slut compared to if a guy wrote a book like that and used those words very frequently.
Can you tell us a little bit about that book, The Fourth Whore, by E.V. Knight?
Yes, it's about Lilith, as in the first woman Lilith, / the first demon, / the mother of monsters, whatever mythology you're looking at, who was supposed to be the first wife of Adam. So E.V. Knight takes that story, it's present day. There's a young girl, Kenzie, who is, she's struggling for money. She's got a drug addict mother. She's sleeping with a landlord to try and starve off eviction. And it's basically Lilith goes around recruiting the 4 whores of the apocalypse. But, there's a look at sex work in there. There's a look at how people, family planning clinics, I think you call it in the US.
Yep.
Abortions and stuff like that. It takes a jab at the far right. It takes a jab at men. It takes a jab at these different aspects of society that look at women and just see them as, things to obey men and breed babies, and that's all they're good for. But there's a strange disease that starts spreading around the world, and the American president is an absolute incompetent turd. And reading this at the end of February, beginning of March, was very scary. But it was weird. It was like, is this a massive marketing campaign? But yeah, it's a really good book. It's really powerful, and I came out of that with, I think one thing that E.V. Knight said about my review was that it got the message that the end of the book is hopeful. There's a lot of brutality before it, but it's kind of
You got my interest. I like that part about the U.S. president too.
Yeah, I'll back that up. I read that in probably around the same time, February, March, and it's. I hesitate to say it's a quick read. It's a short book. It's either under 200 or right around that mark. But at the same time, it's so heavy that it's one that the way I approached it is I read a chapter or two a day, and then I said, okay, I've gotta sit back and digest this before I can go any further. I can't imagine having read that in one sitting or 1 or 2 days. But it's it kind of both what you were saying, Elle, and that book remind me a little bit of V. Castro, and we've had this conversation both with her and on different episodes about how with Evie Knight's book and with V. Castro's books, she's the only person who could have told that story and have it come across with that depth and that sincerity. I'm thinking of like the opening scene, which I won't spoil, the opening chapter of The Fourth Whore. And if a guy wrote that, again, that's the point where you throw the book across the room and say, this is not empowering at all. This is exploitation. And with Castro's books, the way they are so focused around Latin culture, she's the only person who could have written that. And again, to kind of piggyback, I guess, off one of your points, you said, I don't use slurs in my books, and that's fair. With, certain exceptions, I suppose, people who are our general age, the use of slurs in public is not quite as prevalent as it would have been in, say, the 1960s. And that's certainly not to say it doesn't happen, because it absolutely does. But the example I'm thinking of is, Joe Lansdale is a guy who tends to be on the right side of history, somebody who is very accepting and very anti-racism. But you see certain words pop up in his books, and they're usually written from that experience of somebody who lived through the 1960s in places like Texas and, is drawing from the experience of what it felt like to see, hateful people throw words like that at, people they considered less, and basically use that as a storytelling device. And I think you do definitely see people who don't have, that upfront experience who throw it in there for shock value. And I would agree that's not going to see the light of day in my writing. And I think it's going to come across as very insincere and, again, just thrown in there for shock value if that's what it's for. And it'll join that pile of books, that metaphorical pile of books we've talked about that's now been tossed across the room.
Yeah, and I've seen the argument as well that people are saying, like, oh, well, if writers only wrote from their own experience, it would be really boring. But it's like, there's a difference between... So I've always taken write what you know to mean, not to mean write about your own life. It means take your own experiences and apply them to your characters you're writing. If I'm writing a second world fantasy, I don't know what it's like to stand in front of a dragon and have it, trying to breathe fire on me, but I know what it's like to be scared. I know what it's like to, so I don't know if you've seen S.H. Cooper's young adult fantasy, Knight's Daughter. She doesn't know what it's like to be a girl in a fantasy world whose father gets kidnapped, but she knows what it's like to be scared for your family. And like that book resonated with me as well, because in that she has two brothers who their dynamic felt very real to me, because I could relate to it in terms of my own two brothers. But it's about a young girl growing up in a world where women aren't necessarily allowed to do everything they want. Where there are certain expectations, but it doesn't rely too heavily on that idea, but it's still there, and it still feels relatable and real. It's a second world fantasy, but it works because you can identify with that character. And this is the thing is, like, write what you know means that we need more stuff where everyone is reflected in it, so that everyone can identify with the character, everyone can see themselves, even if it is a fantasy that looks on the surface that has no relation to our world. And it's another thing I don't understand is people saying they can't connect to characters who are different to them, who are different gender, different race, different sexuality. It's like, if you can't, I said this to someone the other day on Twitter, if you can't connect to a character like that, that means you lack empathy. You lack compassion. Because, like, everyone knows what it's like to be scared. Everyone knows what it's like to be happy. If you can't connect to a character going through something that's slightly different to your own life, that's your problem. That's not the writer's problem.
Surface level, which is what racism is in my eyes. It's surface level. It's like, meaning you see someone that's got different shaped eyes or different skin color, and you're like, I don't like them. And I never understood that. And I know it's because of the environment I grew up in. I was raised around dominantly Irish, Italians, Portuguese for races. But my dad and mom were really accepting of everyone, and that's how I was raised. I get that it would be different if my mom and dad were hateful, but I don't know. Nowadays, like, we all talk to each other, and me and Brendan have talked with a lot of people throughout the world. Like, you're in South Wales. We're in America. It sounds like we have a lot of similar experiences in life. Obviously, there's variations, but, like, at the heart of it, we're all people. We all bleed. We all feel. And I'm just pretty much having a long reply to your comment about empathy. I don't get people that don't have it. Like, don't you have a heart? Don't you see a kid cry? Don't you go, like, I want to help them? Like, I don't get it. The people that don't have it.
I real quick before you reply to that, Elle, I want to let audio listeners know that Elle has a microphone in front of her, and when she made that comment about if you can't, see from another point of view, you lack empathy, she literally dropped her microphone out of the picture. I think it was probably a subconscious decision, but it was perfectly timed mic drop moment.
And on that point, I want to bring it up now. I was waiting. Brendan texted me something that was really funny. Why don't you tell her what it was? Because it does apply to a subject I got down in my notes.
Yeah, so again, for people who are relying on our descriptions because they can't see video, Elle has a Disney, it looks like the Beauty and the Beast library as her background. Yeah. I'm assuming it's the background. I'm assuming you're not actually in a cartoon library from 1992 or 4.
Oh, no, I am.
Oh, okay. Well, that changes everything. And, Patrick also has the Disney background. I have none because I can't figure out how I can barely get on Skype. But sometimes when Elle moves, she kind of disappears in her background. And it just reminded me of a certain movie that just came out. And I won't give spoilers, but for anybody who has seen Host, whenever Elle disappears into her background, I have this certain expectation of what's going to happen next. And let's just say that movie's still with me after, a viewing 2 days ago.
I need to see that so bad. It's rare that, like, I didn't even realize it was British, but it's rare British horror film were, like, that well received.
Which is why I brought it up, because I want to talk about representation of British, Welsh, even, Irish, Scottish. Let's talk about all the nations in the UK and how you perceive a lack of representation. I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth. Based on all our conversations, I feel like that's fair to say.
I think, so I was very honoured recently. I've just finished reading I've actually just sent the review to you, Pat, Diabolica Britannica.
Yep.
It's probably one of the best anthologies I've read recently.
Getting that today. After we're done talking, I'll be getting to it. Your review.
It's like, so it's authors from across the UK, but I think it's the most I've seen Welsh authors. It's very hard to find Welsh horror authors, and if anyone out there does have any recommendations for that, I know Tim Levin, obviously. Just shoot me a DM on Twitter, because I would love to see more kind of that sort of Welsh horror aspect. So there's stories in there. One of them, the first one, Carrick Sampson, is about a stone structure in Pembrokeshire, but the story is told from his point of view. I'm calling its point of view, about an impending doom sort of thing. There's another story later on that uses, I think it's Tim Levin's story. There was a village in North Wales that decades ago was actually flooded to make a reservoir for England. I don't know if you guys have also heard, there's like certain things in that if a Welsh writer writes about certain things, you know exactly what it's referencing. If a Welsh writer is writing about some sort of landslide, it's probably referencing Aberfan. Although obviously there wasn't the same sort of death as there was at that story is powerful in that it's talking about something in recent Welsh history that was very impactful. But as well as that, obviously you've got in there Scottish authors. I'm not sure if there's Irish authors or North Irish authors, but I think there seems to be, I think it's changing, but there seems to be a stronger American horror scene than there is British. So StokerCon obviously was cancelled in the UK. It's now been rearranged for January as ChillerCon up in Scarborough, which is up. I can name a few British horror authors off the top of my head. Gemma Moore, Alan Baxter, who's sort of British Australian now. Obviously you've got Ginger Nuts of Horror based in the UK, up in Scotland. But I think there seems to be, whereas like obviously you guys talk about like there's loads of horror authors living really near you, but for such a small country, we don't really have that kind of close-knitness that you guys seem to have over there. Like I said, I think it is changing because I think the market is becoming more international than it would have been like a few years ago. But I think it's because as well, like, whereas you guys seem to be able to travel easier, like everyone in America seems to drive. Over here, you're relying on public transport, and a 4-hour trip in the car could take 7 hours in public transport. So I think that plays a part of it as well. So I don't know whether I'm going to go to ChillerCon, but it would be quite expensive for me if I'm relying on public transport, just because of the distance. Whereas if it was in London, I could get down there for like 10 quid on the bus. But yeah, I don't think you see many British authors in horror fiction, but that anthology I do totally tend to check out. Like, there's a lot of authors on there. There's a couple I know, like Stephanie Ellis. There's a couple of names that I recognised. There's the foreword is by Ramsey Campbell. And I think that's another thing as well, is that sometimes if you don't read an author but you know of them, you may not realise they're actually British than American.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realise till recently that Ramsey Campbell was British. And I think that's because, obviously, once these names become a certain level of big, they kind of are semi-adopted by America, if that makes sense. Like,
except for Clive Barker.
Like, yeah. I didn't know for years that he was British.
He's probably he's really good. There's a few others that I'd like to name. Andrew Freudenberg, Justin Park, Matt Shaw, Laura Morrow. They're all excellent. The first one, there were two publishers that I first talked to when I joined the horror community. That's one British company called Sinister Horror Company. I don't see them being talked about enough. They're really great. They got a lot of awesome titles. And then, Adam Neville too. I don't know why I didn't think of him.
Yes. Yeah, he's in the anthology.
But the other one was Crystal Lake Publishing with Joe Meinhardt leading that in South Africa. They're pretty awesome. But yeah, back to the whole Welsh thing. I know there's more. I can only name you and Tim Levin for Welsh authors on the top of my head.
Yeah, so can I.
So for those that don't know, like myself, before I met you, I knew that, Wales was a different country, but what is it that you notice that people don't seem to know that seems obvious to you that isn't to, let's say, American authors about your country?
So, yeah, Wales, Scotland, England, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. Different countries. Ireland isn't Northern Ireland is part of the UK. Ireland isn't, which I think a lot of people maybe in America don't understand. Wales and England are usually lumped together, even by the British media. A lot of the times, like the response at the early days of the whole coronavirus shit, the statements being put out by the so-called British government were not applicable in Wales, in Scotland, in Northern Ireland. They were only applicable in England. And I think it's shown the differences a lot more than anything has before. I think it was, I saw on Twitter the other day, there was a silhouette of England that was England and Wales. It gets frustrating because I think a lot of people expect sort of England and Wales to be the same sort of country, but I mean, you've said it before as well, Pat, that you're amazed at the difference in accents.
Yeah.
Someone who lives 10 minutes away from me has a completely different accent because they have a Cardiff accent. Rich lives about 45 minutes away from me by car. He has a completely different accent. He grew up about an hour and a half away. His accent is completely different. Because he, unlike me, he actually does have a proper Welsh accent. And like, I think even when I went to university, I found a lot of my English friends didn't understand why there was so much animosity from Welsh people towards English people. And it's historic, but it's also a lot of reflection in the media. If we have a rugby competition every year called the Six Nations, there's Wales, England, Scotland, Ireland, France, and Italy. If England win, you do not stop hearing about it in the national papers, on the national programmes, whatever. If Ireland, Scotland, or Wales win, 2 days and then it's gone. And that's how I try to explain to my friends. It sounds really nitpicky, but it's probably the best example I can think of. And when I spoke to them about it, my English friends were like, "Oh, the English are bastards. We are bastards, aren't we?" Yeah, because they often don't think about Wales as a country, and now you've got all these English media wringing their hands over a dinghy of refugees, calling it an invasion. It's like bollocks. Sitting there going, "Oh my God, these people are entering our country illegally," forgetting the fact that 3 months ago, what the Welsh government was saying to English people: do not come into Wales, don't travel into Wales, you're not allowed, you will be fined. You had a shitload of English people trying to come into this country illegally. Because them going to the rural parts of Wales meant they were away from their built-up cities where coronavirus was taking a toll, but they were also risking bringing it to rural parts of Wales where they have their little second homes. And putting strain on the infrastructure there. That's another issue as well. I could ramble on. It's the whole second homes thing. So especially back in like the 60s and 70s, a lot of English people bought second homes and holiday homes in parts of Wales, and that drove up the prices. So local people couldn't buy homes in local areas. And they have houses now that sit there for 6 months, 9 months out of the year, just empty.
That's similar to where I live in South Jersey. One of the towns is called Margate. It's a really rich town. There's Margate, Longport, Ventnor. Those are all rich places. The homes are millions of dollars that line up the beaches. Beaches are gorgeous. I'm just going to say it. I don't care. I still got my New England card, but they beat the shit out of all the New England beaches. Reason being, and I love New England, but the beaches there, you have to cut your feet open over all these jagged pieces of rock and shells to go into water that is so fucking cold that it's unbearable at times. Whereas down in the beaches I've gone to in Jersey, it's nice and sandy. It's gorgeous. The water's not too cold. That's just my opinion. But the situation of people from New York, parts of North Jersey, Pennsylvania, they come up to where I live, and during the pandemic, they tried coming here too. So it's a similar situation, and I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, leave us alone. This is where we live. Please don't come here. I don't want anyone getting sick, And to see some of the pictures that came out when the pandemic was at its peak, like the beaches that are just full of thousands of people that are pretty much shoulder to shoulder. I saw this one pool in Cancun, I believe it was, where there was hundreds of people in one massive pool. I don't know. I'm kind of getting off track, but I just think from time to time that like the Earth is trying to tell us to just purge and fuck off.
Yeah, and because England are opened up a lot now, they're declaring states of emergency and like on the beach in Bournemouth because of the amount of people there. Like people just seem to be forgetting that there's still a pandemic on. There's still a risk. But probably the best way to explain it to Americans is if you imagine like Wales, Scotland, and England especially as separate states, because you have that overarching government like you would have the federal government, but then you have certain rules and regulations that Wales control themselves, Scotland control themselves. Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. But when you talk about the beaches, then Pat as well, the beach by me in Penarth is pebbly. It's just covered in rocks. You wouldn't go bare feet there. The sea is the Bristol Channel, and it's grey. Oh. And then you go to like West Wales, and the Gower, and the beaches there are pure sand. They're absolutely beautiful.
Love it.
The sea is actually blue. But even down the road, there's a Barry, which for anyone listening, if you've seen Gavin and Stacey, you'd be familiar with Barry Island. All my friends at uni were obsessed with it. They love the fact that I live near there. Even the beach there is all sand. So you find that a lot of people on sunny days will go down to Barry, but there's like 2 roads in and out. So when it's a nice hot sunny day, you'll get stuck in traffic for like 4 hours to go somewhere that's 10 minutes down the road.
Ooh.
But yeah, and apparently last weekend, so things in Wales only recently started opening up, and my friend who lives in Barry said, well, last weekend it was horrendous. He said you could not have gotten to Barry Islands in a car at all, or on the train, because everyone who jumps on the train then fills it up. We're supposed to be wearing masks here on public transport. I had to get on the train last week for work. The train to Penarth was good. It was quiet. Everyone was wearing masks. I had to get the train to Barry home because there's a station further down the road in Penarth that I could jump off at. And it was busy. No one was wearing masks. They all had them hanging around their neck so they could put them on at Barry Station because that's where they find you if you're not wearing a mask.
Yikes. Yeah, I was in Home Depot, and they were just... So, people that haven't visited me just asked me about Jersey Shore, because before I came down here, I thought that it was a bunch of Italians that had terrible tans, guys with massive muscles that were just dumb meatheads, but I've seen maybe 5 of those types down here. And the one time I was at Home Depot, I saw a guy that looked like he should be on Jersey Shore with his friend. One had a mask pulled under his nose, one didn't really have one on. And in my head, I'm just like, you guys are fucking idiots. Like, look at the death, the percentage of people that get sick. Even though the death rate isn't super high, like, we don't know the long-term effects of this. It's scary.
Yeah, and I think a massive mistake at the beginning was saying, "Oh, young people don't get affected." Young people maybe don't die as much as other people, but that's like I've seen people on Twitter who are my age who are 2-3 months on after having it can't walk up a flight of stairs without getting exhausted.
Yeah. I've had two friends our age, all of us are the same age basically, that have had it, and one of them has a 2-year-old daughter that had it. They're all fine now, but it's to act like you know what's going on is silly, because not even people that have studied this shit, diseases or whatever, there's no vaccine yet for a reason. We are learning about it as it goes along. So moving on, let's get back to writing. Brennan, how about you awkwardly segue us back?
As awkwardly as humanly possible. You know what? Before we completely move on, I would add one more thing to that conversation.
Sure.
I would just say there's nothing more indicative of like modern society, whether it be in New Jersey, Massachusetts, or Wales and England. And England, by the way, Al, not in England.
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
I thought you said that. I was like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah.
Just talk about this.
We just said
kind
this.
of mumbled there, so I wanted to be very clear. There's just nothing more indicative of society than just the fact that we got tired of a pandemic, so we decided it was, for all intents and purposes, over, and that we could battle it by wearing masks around our neck and by putting in the bare minimum of effort. And there was one more point that I've forgotten, so now I'm going to awkwardly segue, actually kind of back into editing a little bit, because I said I wanted to talk about that list of words that you put forth, and you already highlighted that. So you kind of classify extraneous words that you find in a lot of writing as either killer or filler. So could you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so I got the list somewhere here. I can't remember all the words off the top of my head. But basically, a killer word is what that like stunts the sentence. So it'll affect the flow of the sentence and really stands out. And then a filler word is a word that's just not necessary. And like they're probably words that we're used to using because, and they do tend to get overused a lot. That then is another one. You don't need then. You don't need to say then he opened the door. We know that it's happening. We know that it's the next thing that happens because it's described immediately after the previous action. He turned around and then opened the door. You don't need the then. Or whatever it is. I got it. 2 seconds, because I have a corkboard, but it always falls behind my desk, and my desk is very full. There we go. So if I can get, so this is my handy little list of, I don't know if you can see that very well. Oh no, I just disappeared. So I've got a little list that I keep next to me, basically. Mm-hmm. So killer words. Suddenly is another one that really annoys me. If I see suddenly, because it doesn't add anything, and I think that's what can be said about a lot of these words. They don't add anything. So like filler words here are just, quite, rather, perhaps, actually. Killer words, kind of, started. This is one thing I noticed a lot. Started to. How do you start to walk? You're either walking or you're not walking. Or she started to stand. Okay, if they get interrupted and someone grabs them by the shoulder and shoves them back down, I can understand that. But if she starts to stand, she's either going to be standing or not. And I think if writers can remember little things like that, like when you read through your work, actually try and picture something like that. If you say someone started to do something, consider whether or not they would. You're either eating or you're not eating. You're either doing something or you're not doing it. You're not starting to do something. You might start a book. That's fair. That's different. But you don't start to read. You either read or you don't. Well, read, then go on Twitter, then maybe play a game on your mobile, then maybe read a bit. But yeah, it's little words like that. I think if they're things that I always try and look out for when I'm editing someone's work. And normally you can see them because they do stand out. And they are, I think one thing as well is if you know what words you're looking for, just use little tricks. Read the sentence out loud to yourself. Drop the word, and then if it still makes sense, just delete it.
Yeah, in regards to filler words, now I'm going to bring up Ken McKinley, because if we don't mention him on every episode, he doesn't cut Patrick and I royalty checks.
We get a fine.
Yeah, exactly. He said to me, in regards to that we newer writers especially have a tendency to write the way they talk. And I feel like if we took the transcript of me asking questions and making statements on here, there's going to be so many that's, so many, just all of those filler words, justs, varies, quites, all those little things that are just completely extra and unnecessary. And looking at it that way, in addition to reading out loud, was a huge, huge help in me just kind of going over and rereading my own stuff and removing that extra nonsense. And I think that tip you gave is perfect. Read it without, if you think that you might have an extraneous word in there, take it out, read it out loud. And if the sentence doesn't sound like it was cobbled together by a 2-year-old, then it's probably fine. In regards to the killer words, now you have a list, but I have to imagine it's not an exhaustive list. Do you kind of find more of those, and even ones that aren't always killer words, just by reading out loud, or do you have other methods of tracking those down?
I think when you, like, basically I've been reading other people's work and critiquing work since I started writing, a little bit after I started writing. So I joined Fiction Press and fanfiction.net back when I was like 11. And one aspect of that was feedback, was reviewing other people's work. But I noticed that other people were reviewing mine in terms of, at the time I didn't realize it was in terms of critique, but that's what they were doing. And that's how I learned to write. That was how I learned how to format dialogue. That's how I learned that you actually put a comma at the end, not a full stop, and then you have a lowercase s, because that was nothing I was ever taught in school. We weren't taught grammar in school to that extent. So I think when you start, the best thing as a writer, one of the best things you can do as a writer is give other writers feedback. Is once you start looking at other writers' work with a critical eye, you start noticing it in your own writing as well. So, like I said, I've been doing that since I was like 11, 12. And then obviously at university, you do the seminars where you do go into that in more detail. And then I joined Scribophile when I came out of university. So it's always something I've done. And when you know to look for, like, the tip about taking that out was actually something that I was taught at university. And they gave us a list of words, of editing words. And they basically said to us, when you're editing your work, do Control F on these. Check where you're using them. That's how I learned to do that. And I think sometimes when you're reading something with the intent of providing feedback or editing it, something else might jump out at you and you might think that doesn't sound right. Or it might just flow a bit off. And then, yeah, you can just do the same thing. You can take that word out. She began to falls in the same line as started to. So rather than she began to walk, you can just say she walked, or whatever the action is. And even things like using action beats instead of speech tags, or using speech tags sparingly, not only like, yes, use she said, he said. Don't start saying she yelled threateningly, or, that's what annoys me as well. One of the things on here that is a filler word is any word ending in ly. So any adjective like that, and obviously that doesn't mean that every single sentence has to be parsed back. It doesn't have to be sparse. It doesn't have to be short. But you don't want a sentence to be longer than it has to be. And yeah, just like she's like speech tags as well. I remember, being in school and being told, don't use said. Don't ever use said. Use other words, use descriptive words to describe what they're saying. It's like, no, because said melds into the rest of the writing. It's non-intrusive. The same with certain, it's like the same as overusing exclamation points. They start to stand out, and not in a good way. The full stop, you get used to seeing it. But then if you use an exclamation point at the end of every single sentence, it loses its power, essentially.
Yeah. No, I find that if I'm using said, most of the time it's to kind of convey in dialogue where there's more than two people speaking. I'm using it to help the reader keep track of who's talking at a given time. And if I want to say that they yelled or that they spoke quietly or yelled threateningly or whatever, I try my best to make that more evident in the dialogue than by just straight out saying, "Oh, look, they're yelling!" exclamation point.
Yeah, which is exactly what it should be done. Said should be used if you don't have an action beat. If you've got a dialogue between two people as well, you don't need speech tags. If it's just a conversation between two different characters and there's no one else in the room, you can just have it between the two of them. But yeah, action beats are good. He said, she said is great. It's useful. It tells the reader what they need to know and know more. And you're right. If you need to convey that they're shouting, I mean, even things like they whispered or they shouted, again, used sparingly, they work really well. But yeah, if it's conveyed in the dialogue, that's when it's most effective. And I think a lot of that comes from writers underestimating their own abilities, and not trusting in themselves or in their readers. The same as I hate italics. I think italics need to be used very carefully and with a very good purpose. One of the biggest things I'll say to writers, if I'm giving them feedback, is why is this in italics? Really think about it. If you're using it for emphasis, it doesn't work. Because if you're using it for emphasis, I might read a sentence different to how Pat reads it. And if I read a sentence and I feel like the emphasis should go on the third word, but the writer has forced it into the second word, that's going to put me off. Because that's not, like, everyone has their own natural speech patterns, everyone has their own way of reading things. And forcing that emphasis means that either you're not confident in your writing or you're not confident enough in your readers to read what you want them to read.
Good points. Also, one more thing. Apologies if we covered it. Tautology. Example. He nodded his head. The something like that. I only got one example on the top of my head. What do you see that a lot?
Not that often, actually. I think a lot of people just stick to he nodded. I think the thing with gestures like that is that characters do them a lot, probably more than we would in real life. And the amount of times I've sat here and I'm writing something and I'm kind of doing like, how would I be doing? I'm like, yeah, but I'm nodding, okay, yeah, and doing the gestures myself. And I think, but how often do you actually nod at someone? Like, obviously in this conversation I'm nodding, but Pat's nodding now. But you're not. It's not just a.
Brennan's giving us the finger.
Constant, yeah.
He's not.
But even when people nod, they don't
that's untrue.
Nod.
Sorry.
Even when people nod, they don't just. They don't just nod once. It's a lot. And
now that I'm doing it, yeah, one nod seems weird to do.
Aggressive.
It's like an acknowledgement, though, but that's that could be part of that storytelling aspect. If I sit here and I nod my head back and forth, then I'm, continually acknowledging what you say. If I give you one quick nod, it's just, it says something totally different. What it says, I don't know. But it's definitely a very different gesture. that can be interpreted in different ways.
That's all I see is like, good job, kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
we all know that now.
I don't know if we've really talked about something that I think all of us love. Is you talked about how S.H. Cooper is one of you're quite frankly, I think one of her biggest fans, and like where all three of us are a fan of her work. But one thing I would love to talk about is her upcoming collection that I just finished this morning. I'm not even saying this because like we're talking about it on the show. There's no fillers. There are no killers. Except there are killers. There's no killer
all killer,
word.
no filler.
There we go. Nailed it. Thank you for saving me.
That's not right at all.
So my whole point was this collection is amazing. Every story is great. Can you talk to us about how it started on your end as the editor? Because you did a hell of a job. I only noticed nothing wrong with it.
That wasn't an awkward sentence at all.
Yeah, I don't know where it was going with that. My brain does tricks where it's like, shut the fuck up, but the other side keeps telling me to keep talking. Someone edit this out. Go ahead, Else. Save me.
So I started working with Sarah last year. I think I tweeted about the Betterine thing, and she contacted me. And quite frankly, I was like, wait, hang on, this is the woman who writes Call in Darkness, which is a podcast her and Gemma and Moore do. And I was like, she doesn't need my help editing. Well, she's great. She's a really good writer anyway. And she sent me over the Festering ones. Mm-hmm. So I started going through that, and I worked on that with her. And she was really happy with what I was doing. She said that she thinks it was polishing, basically. Like, her writing is really good anyway. Her writing is really strong. But it's just a really minor thing. Like, taking out killer and filler words and making suggestions and stuff. So we did that, and that came out last year. Then she contacted me about The Knight's Daughter, and I worked on that, I think it was the end of last year or early this year. Anyway, and then during lockdown, she emailed me about All That's Fair. And I think some of them are stories that were previously on the No Sleep forum. And she was telling me, she was writing so many new ones for it, but she sent me over the initial 10, I think it was. And I went through that. I just edited it. But her writing's really good anyway. It needs really basic editing to it. She makes my job very easy. And it's always a joy to read her work, because I think every single the three I've worked on, I've now read everything she's published, every book she's put out, either through editing it or from picking up a copy and then reading it. So the two I didn't do were Corpse Garden and From Twisted Roots, which are, quite frankly, really, really good short story collections. All That's Fair is the first short story collection I've worked on for her. And I'm really excited for that to come out, because everyone I've seen who's read it is like, it's one of those books, because I've seen it, because I've worked on it, I feel really proud of Sarah, and I feel really proud of the book, and it's great to see like that sort of reception for something that I believe in as well. Like, and I feel like that about the Festering ones and the Knight's Daughter. I feel like that about other clients that I have when I see their works going out into the world. I feel really proud of them, because I think as a writer, it's hard to put yourself out there, and when you get that, whether you're self-publishing a book and you're getting like really positive reviews on it, or you're getting short stories accepted. I know me and Sarah are really close now through me doing the work, and I'm always there to cheer her on. I'm always there to tell her, no, your writing's really good. Don't, again, go back to reviews. Don't read the reviews, because one slightly negative review doesn't really mean anything compared to having, 5 positive, like glowing reviews before the books even come out.
Agreed. I like your friendship with her. You guys are just like, it's like you guys grew up together. But let's talk about All That's Fair a little bit as far as stories go. Obviously, don't spoil them, but do you have a favorite or a group of favorites?
I really like So Much Filler. I think that was a really good one.
I could relate.
Woman.
Yeah, I loved that one.
Yeah.
That was I typed up a review last night, and I named a couple that I felt like had really good and unique monsters, a few that kind of followed a theme that I saw throughout, and then named a couple favorites. And I got to the end of that, I'm like, and there's like 10 stories I still want to tell you about. But the filler one, that absolutely, I loved that one. I was more than a little misty by the time the credits rolled on that one.
Yeah, I'm I'm really bad at thinking of short story names. I've usually got to have like the collection next to me so I can check it if I'm writing up reviews. I really like the Legend of is it the Legends of the Tiger?
That's not in this one.
Was it in a previous collection?
Yeah, I got the thing right in front of me.
Yeah, so let me see if I can pull it up on.
Did you have any? Were you the cause for 12 Hands? That story titled 12 Hands. Did you have any?
No, is that the one that's set in the UK?
Yeah, when I read that, only because I have insider knowledge of talking to you so much, I was like, was Elle the one that started that? Because it seems like a story that would be based in Welsh history, and it gave me ideas about St. David's Day, about one of your stories.
Yeah, and when I read that, I was messaging her when I was reading it, and to be honest, I was saying to her like I am thoroughly impressed by how British that story reads. Which, nothing against you Americans, but that's not something you have often. Normally it's normally if you see an American writing a British character, I would have had to have made a lot more changes than I actually made to that story. But even I think it was when I think she says maths in it or something, and as soon as I saw maths, I was like, oh my god, it's British.
You had a similar comment about Paul Tremblay writing, I think it was a Welsh character in Survivor's Song.
Oh, yeah, he's got like a British character in that.
Oh, British, okay. My apologies.
Yeah, English, I think he is. But yeah, it comes across really well.
What can American writers do to adopt, besides obviously Google and words and stuff, what is your advice for American writers to actually write realistic UK-based characters?
I think it comes down to just making the effort. I think when you like Sarah has and like Paul Tremblay, I think when you see authors do that, it's because it's almost like respectful, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And it's a little bit of research. Like if you've got friends who are from that part of the country, maybe check things with them. I think Sarah was expecting a lot more corrections on that story. But I didn't really have to make any in terms of British and American thing. I think one or two I said, oh, wait, no, a British person would say this. But I think as well, being aware that someone from Bristol will not speak the same as someone from London, just like someone from Cardiff doesn't speak the same as someone from Newport. North Wales speak very differently to South Wales. I mean, even in South Wales, Swansea, Cardiff, and Newport are the three South Wales cities. We all sound massively different from one another. And just being aware of like things like slang. One of the biggest things that'll trip you up is things like jumper and sweater. We don't say sweater.
Is that the same thing
as
jumper? Yeah. That's new for me.
Even, I mean, there's lists online as well of like American versus British spelling.
Mm-hmm.
Or even watch some YouTube clips to try and get a hang of the accent. So if you have a conversation between, like, obviously not everything's written in dialect, and that's fine. But if you have a conversation where a British character calls, I'm going to my math class, that's going to really stand out to to a British reader. Same as, like, if I called it a sidewalk instead of a pavement, that would be really strange. And I think even sometimes you can utilize it, because I mean, when I was a teenager, my friends used to take the mick because I was so used to, like, listening to American punk rock bands. I used a lot of Americanisms when I was a teenager. And then that, like, my friends used to say to me, stop saying awesome. You don't need, like, I said it all the time because I picked it up from what I was watching, what I was listening to, things like that.
That's awesome.
So you can even make it, it's like, during Hamilton, the awesome. Yep. Wow. That line had me cracking up, because that is literally, if you're British, that's what you think of when you think of Americans. It's that kind of, it's stupid because, like, obviously, like, every American person I know has a different accent for one another.
Right.
But when you say, like, oh my God, the Americans, it's that kind of, I think it's like the Valley Girl accent.
Yeah.
It's when you say, if you say Space Ghetto in a Scottish accent, I think, is it Space Ghetto? If you say Space Ghetto in a Valley Girl accent, it sounds like you're saying Spice Girl in a Scottish accent. And that's probably one of my favourite things.
I was going to say, one thing I would add as a completely non-UK person is you probably, if you're writing a British character, you probably want to know what town, city, area they're from. And the example I'll give you is I kind of just randomly threw in a character I was writing. I had an idea of what they'd sound like, and I said, oh yeah, they're from Bristol. And then I looked up a Bristol accent and I said, nope, that's not even close to what I'm thinking that this character sounds like. So I had to kind of look at different regions and nail down the one that they were from, and it turns out they were Scottish, not even from the same country.
Yeah, and it's one thing when I was watching iZombie, Ravi in that is British, but even, I think normally if you've seen an American TV show and there's a British character, it's normally like Emily in Friends. It's a very posh character with received pronunciation, and no one in this country speaks like that unless they come from money, basically. And I was actually amazed to find out the actress was actually British. But then you look at something like iZombie, where Ravi is from London. He has a London accent. His humour is very British. There's the actor who was King Arthur in Merlin pops up in it. It's another British actor. And when they meet for the first time, they go, "Oh, you're from this part of London. Yeah, you're from this," because London has different accents. A Londoner could probably tell you where they could be in a room full of other Londoners and probably tell you where each person is from. And their first conversation is about the football teams they support. And it felt really real and really natural, because that's exactly what, even if you don't follow football, if you meet someone, when I meet someone from, I don't like football, but one of the things I take the mick out of Rich all the time is because he supports Swansea. Whereas, I'm from Cardiff, so my dad wasn't happy when we met because of that. And it doesn't help that Rich is actually technically, Rich was born in England, which is funny because we'll say that I'm Welsh, he's English, but I sound English, and he's got a Welsh accent. So his national football team is England. So when I first started seeing him, I had to go to my dad and be like, yeah, so he supports Swansea. And my dad just looked at me and went, oh. And then I was like, and nationally he supports England. Oh, like, you would have thought I was dating like some criminal or something, just from my dad's reaction, because that's the football teams he supports, which doesn't affect anything.
Have you seen Green Street Hooligans with Elijah Wood and the dude from
Yeah, Charlie Hunnam.
No, I haven't.
I fucking love that movie. I don't know how, besides what videos I saw of riots after football games and that movie, my interpretation in my dumb American brain is football games over there get super crazy. People beat the shit out of each other, and I don't know if that's accurate at all.
When I was a teenager, my parents asked us not to go into Cardiff if Cardiff and Swansea were playing football. Because the fans would just kick off at one another over nothing. Which is weird, because then you go to rugby, which is like, it's quite an aggressive, physical game.
Mm.
And you go to rugby during the national games, like England, Wales, rugby, the atmosphere in Cardiff is amazing. And it's, everyone has a joke and a laugh with each other no matter who wins.
That should be the thing. That should be how it always is.
Yeah, but when it comes to football, it's just, the rivalries just get ridiculous. It's just out of hand, and it's, yeah, and then you've got like certain teams like Manchester United who people support across the UK. But if you support a different team, you hate Man U. The same is probably the same from speaking to my friend at work who actually supports Man United and the Patriots. I think it's the same kind of thing where it's a team that wins so often.
They did. I don't know. Tom Brady left, so.
The most I know about Patriots is like picking up bits from you, that documentary about that player. Yeah, and Matt in work. But yeah, like it's when the team wins that often, there's a lot of random people who are like, oh, I hate you because you support a team that wins. It's like, well, it's not them. They're not playing. They're not choosing the players. You're just spectators, which is fine. If everyone has a thing, sports makes you happy, great. But I don't understand the people who get so worked up about sports that they get like really depressed if their team loses.
Yeah, so as you just said, I'm a New England Patriots fan, born and raised in Massachusetts. Moved to South Jersey, which is Eagles country for the most part, which is a Philadelphia-based team. There's also it's weird. It's like a mixed bag down here. It's mostly the Philadelphia team, which is the Eagles. You got New York teams. The biggest biggest pain in the ass is the Giants. The strangest part I've had after so the Eagles beat the Patriots a few years ago in the Super Bowl. I wear my Boston gear whenever because I mean that's who I support. That's who I've always supported. And I was in Home Depot with my wife just looking for stuff. I hear someone go, boo! I look up. It's this dude in Eagles gear. I'm like, your team beat mine. Fuck off.
Was it Rich Duncan?
Yeah, Rich Duncan looked at me. He's like, boo. I wasn't even looking at you. And this guy wasn't even near me. He looked at me, basically shouted it. And I wear this one jersey mainly of this player named Rob Gronkowski. He's liked by most fans because he's just a party boy he's a big goofy kid and he's really good at his position. And I walked into this liquor store one time and these guys with New York Giant uniforms just started talking trash and I'm like, I'm just trying to get beer. Like, fucking leave me alone. Like, I'm a big guy, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I don't partake in I get emotional with it. Like, I like yell at the TV. That's the worst I do. I don't hit my TV. I don't break shit. When the game's over, I'm like, well, whatever. I didn't lose money. I didn't gain money. So I don't get it.
It's just like my dad's a massive Man U fan, so I'm used to him. And again, it's weird that them and the Patriots, from what I understand, they seem to like parallel each other. So up until a few years ago, Alex Ferguson was manager of Manchester United. He was brilliant. He was really good. He bought people. I know nothing about football, but I've seen exactly where Man U have gone wrong, and it's because Ferguson bought young players up and he trained them. And then since he's gone, they just seem obsessed with buying players and bringing players in. It's like, no, get the freaking under-18 squad and train them. Focus on them. Focus on the next generation. But they've not been as good since Ferguson left. So yeah, I'm used to my dad being like wound up and stuff. But then he'll sit down and have a beer and watch a film. Like, doesn't matter at the end of the day. And he knows that. And my dad's a lifelong Man U fan. He loves football. But even he was saying, if football doesn't come back, that's not a bad thing because they're all overpaid anyway. The way he saw it when football stopped over here, he was just like, he missed it, but he said football players get paid way too much for what they do anyway.
Agreed.
Compared to everyone, we could live without football. We could live without EastEnders or whatever other TV programs would have been on filming at the time. We couldn't live without the most underpaid people in our society.
Social workers, people in the military, police officers, firefighters, EMTs, teachers, to name a few.
And I would echo that. I'm, a huge football fan. I love my baseball, but I'm watching them. Yes, sorry, American football.
Fucking idiot.
Add to your visual of, British football of the tough people in the street beating the hell out of each other and singing the "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles" song. But to my original point before I got called a fucking idiot,
Sorry.
The baseball season that's going on now, I mean, you've already got 3-4 teams who have been shut down at least temporarily because of virus spreading, and it's not worth it. I love my Red Sox. I love baseball, and I can't watch it because I hate the way that it's being forced to operate to, fake a sense of normalcy. I wouldn't be shocked to see the football season get canceled, but I also wouldn't be shocked to see them push it through with minor restrictions that aren't really going to add much to it. I mean, the date has already passed where players can opt out of the season. They announced it on a Tuesday, said you got to opt out by like Thursday at 4, and it's gross. And it's like I said, they're just running it with some semblance of, visual safety, but at the end of the day, you're going to have people get sick. Especially, you look at baseball, there's no sport that's better set up for social distancing, and you've still got teams dropping like flies. Now, this all stemmed off of a comment about how good Sarah Cooper is at writing British stories, despite the fact that she lived in Florida. So I'm gonna bring it back real quick if you guys are cool with that.
Yeah. What are your favorite stories from that collection? All that's fair.
So I mentioned that. I'm sorry. I thought you were asking me, but let's ask Elle because she's an actual guest and not the long-winded co-host.
No, it's fine. Like I said, I think so much filler. The Limpia Woman, 12 Hands. 12 Hands was really good. And I think overall, it's just a really strong collection. But yeah, Brennan, what were your favorites?
Oh, thank you for asking. So I would actually agree with those. I thought The Limping Woman was a really, really good story on its own, but I thought it was the perfect choice to lead it off. I am such a sucker for collections having a good first story. I really feel like making that good first impression is so important. And even if a collection or an anthology is overall pretty good, like I've already kind of made a judgment if the first story doesn't work just based on how the curating or the editing is done, referring to like, an anthology where part of putting that together is not just selecting the stories, but selecting the order, making sure it's very even. And the other one I would absolutely add to it is I loved the Crone's Wood. I thought the way that flipped the table on me and, just went in a direction I wasn't ready for, I thought that was fabulously done. And I would also add, I mean, I've had her books on my Kindle like forever, and I'll like move them to the top of the list and then, get distracted by something shiny and not get to it. And pretty much as soon as I finished this one, I opened up, I got going on the Festering ones, and I was reading page 1. Sorry, go ahead.
I love Festering ones.
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. I was reading page 1 and I had, children running circles around me, and I had to read like the first page several times. And I'm thinking, I'm going to have to put this down. Like I can't focus on it right now. And I got to like page 2 or 3, and the description of like the hole opening up and the Spider-Woman coming out, and I'm like, okay, yeah, like you guys are gonna have to go do something else because I can't put this down now. I have no choice but to continue reading this.
Yeah, that was the first one I edited for her, and it was just like, I love it so much. And I think Faith is such a brilliant character. I know she's planning 2 now. I can't wait. And to be honest, I'm honoured because I get to read them before everyone else. And I'm doing them and I'm like, I can't believe she's paying me to do this. This is like amazing. And she's probably my biggest advocate for stop undercharging. As she says to me, stop undercharging because you charge too little for it. But what you're saying about anthologies and about editing them, I'm reading a vampire anthology at the moment that's edited by Paula Guerin, who is one of my favourite editors along with Ellen Datlow. And what she did with that is all female authors, but the stories are arranged chronologically. Because it's vampires, it can obviously take place at any point in history. So like the first story is like I think the first or second story is like the Tudor period, and then it works up through. And I think that was when I read that in the foreword, that's how it was arranged. I was like, that is such a clever idea for this sort of anthology where it's arranged in when the story took place. Yeah, I think you're right. I think when that's why like Ellen Datlow and Paula Guerin, every single anthology I pick up that they do is amazing.
It's a definite skill. It's not as simple as picking good stories and making sure they don't have a bunch of errors in them. And yeah, the whole chronological thing, I agree with that. But yeah, it's an art form, basically making a group of stories. And again, this is true whether it's one author or whether it's a collection of a variety of authors, but making the anthology, making the group of stories essentially tell a story in and of itself, mostly revolving around themed anthologies like the one you mentioned. And even if there's good stories, if that aspect of it is not done well, it detracts from the overall quality of what you're reading. No question.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add in 2 stories that I liked on top of the Limpin' Woman, which I agree with all your points, is Vermelda, which was...
Oh, yeah.
Just, I don't know how to describe it without ruining it. It was creepy. And All Will Be Forgiven, which is the third to last story, basically will make you not look at cats the same way again and creep you out. S.H. Cooper has a way of describing things, and she plays with your senses, and it's just enough to reach the max capacity of creeping you out and then saying, all right, we're done. And then ends it very well. So is there any stories or books that you're reading right now, Elle, that you would recommend to anyone?
Not horror, but I'm reading at the moment. I'm partway through Cinderella is Dead.
What's that?
It's like a YA fantasy, but it's brilliant. It's a fantasy land where Cinderella died, I think 200 years before, but the idea is that all the girls have to go to this ball, and they're picked out by men. And it's a world where men rule. It's almost like a YA fantasy Gilead, like Handmaid's Tale, where women have specific roles they have to follow. They have to really push. They go to this ball. And that if you're into like YA fantasy and stuff, that book is brilliant. So that's what I'm reading at the moment. I've just finished The Hunted by Gabriel. Let me just check his surname. Gabriel Bergmoser, which is like Australian horror / thriller. That was really good actually. And it kind of, when I write my review, you guys will probably see this, but it's one of those books where I think if a different author had handled it. The way it goes, you kind of half expect the female character in it to actually have to face sexual assault, and she doesn't, and it's a really small point, but I feel like so many authors rely on that as a to happen to a female character. But kind of when it doesn't happen, it's like almost weirdly refreshing. But yeah, that was a really good book. But yeah, I think at the moment I'm not reading a lot else that like really sticks out at the moment. But yeah.
How about you, Brennan?
I just wrapped up last night. Alan Baxter has a new book coming out at the end of the month. Recall Night. It's a sequel to a book he wrote. I think it came out last year, called Manifest Recall, and it's kind of like that, Jack Reacher type badass main character, but it's done in such an Alan Baxter way. So it has supernatural elements, like the pacing and the fight scenes are just like absolute top notch. And the thing that I get such a kick out of with his writing on that is Alan Baxter is such a stand-up guy. He's so like anti-misogyny, and he's writing this character that you would expect to be that, pillar of toxic masculinity, but he's doing it in such a way where this character is ridiculing other people who kind of embody that. And there's just little, they're not overwhelming, but there's just little hints of how that the author feels towards racism, towards sexism, towards displays of emotion and things like that. So you get this, very kind of archetypical character done in a really, really different way. And for me, that's enough. That's a big enough selling point. It's just that 70% familiar, 30% we've never quite seen it done like this before. But on top of that, like I said, it's a one-day read, even at like 160 pages. It's really hard to put down and do, responsibilities and things you're actually supposed to do. What are you in the middle of right now, Pat?
Well, today I'm going to start John F.D. Taft's The Fearing Blood and Brimstone. And then I'm finally going to dive into Bird Box for the first time.
Have you not read it?
I haven't.
Oh my god. The book is so much better than the film.
That and A Head Full of Ghosts I got to read, because Brennan said that those two books and Laurel Hightower's Whisper in the Dark are like his holy trinity of horror. So
Whispers is amazing. I'm gonna order Crossroads tomorrow. Basically tomorrow not tomorrow, so later in the week I'm gonna be buying Crossroads, A Knight's Daughter, because I don't have it in paperback, and All That's Fair, because I don't have that in paperback. I want those 3 books in paperback. And I said to Laurel on Twitter, it's like, well, a little birdie told me that my name actually appears in all 3. Because obviously the edited by. This is why I can get away with buying them, because I'm not supposed to be buying books at the moment. Rich keeps telling me about getting books. I'm like, I'm not getting them. I'm being sent them.
Yeah.
I'm not buying them. This is where my 3 pile is coming from. So I promise I haven't bought books for ages, but I need to buy these 3 because, obviously Knight's Daughter and All That's Fair I'm edited by, and then Crossroads, I think Pat, you showed me. I was very over.
Laurel makes a shout out to us. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, that was like when I saw that. I think I was probably like I think it was probably not that long ago when like everything was making me cry, and I saw that and I was just like, oh my god, that's amazing.
To see, she shouts out to you, me, Ellen, Brennan, and the rest of our team. To see that, I'm like, okay, well, I think it's fair to say in a lot of people's opinion, she's someone that is clearly going to be one of the top dogs eventually. I mean, she's very, very good.
I can't wait to read Crossroads.
Yeah, the overall quality of that book, I will absolutely take a mention in the acknowledgments.
Yeah. So one last thing before we close this thing up. a contest is being held for at Deadhead Reviews, so I'll have the lady in charge of that tell you all about it.
So the contest is sort of ties into our Monster Mash theme. It's horror in Hollywood. I was listening to the Secret History of Hollywood podcast, which is brilliant. It talks a lot about the early days of Hollywood, the sort of formation of Warner Brothers. Also, one of the podcasts talks about Walt Disney going after communists, which was really good, and the whole McCarthyism era. And I was listening to these podcasts about sort of the goings on at Hollywood especially in the early days, and thinking about sort of Hollywood is a really fascinating place, and behind the glitz and glamour there's a lot of darkness. But when I was listening to the Warner Brothers podcast and things, I was thinking, like, this would be a really good setting for horror. And once we kind of came up with a theme and stuff, that's when I found out that there are anthologies, and I've bought one of them, 2 anthologies, around a similar theme as well. But basically the theme idea came out of a really selfish place for me, of me going, I really want to read horror set around this. So the idea of the contest is it's up to 4,000 words. That means it can be anything from 100 words to 4,000. Because I think flash fiction can also be really powerful as well if it's done well. Set at any point in Hollywood's history, present day, or going back to the early days of it. But I think the responses on Twitter have been really good. I can't wait till we actually open up the entries and I can start reading them. It's judged at the moment. The judges are me, Patrick, and Cassie. And if anyone listens to this thinks they want to have a go at judging as well, just drop me an email. I'm going to make sure it's not too overwhelming for people. So my aim is I'm hopefully going to read every entry when they start coming in. The actual judges will start getting sort of batches of stories after the closing date. So yeah, I'm just really excited for it, to be honest. I've had loads of really good feedback about the prizes we're offering as well. Because I think you try to go for prizes that'll be good for published and unpublished authors. Obviously, podcast spot I think is good for anyone in any position. I'm offering editing for it as well. Yeah. So yeah, and just whether it's people want to do like, and I think I said in the thing, you're welcome to cross genre. Just give us something that's exciting, basically, and that's good to read.
And where can people find that, the info on the contest?
So all the info will be at deadheadreviews.com. I think I've spoken to Ellen about it as well. We're going to open up entries on the 15th of September. And they'll be open from the 15th to the 30th. So we basically, the idea behind that is give writers enough time to write and edit and get their feedback on it without overwhelming. And then, yeah, we'll be looking. I think the timeline at the moment is to try and announce the winners in early 2021. That should hopefully give us plenty of time to read it and judge it and things like that. But yeah, the information is deadheadreviews.com. I can send you the actual link, Pat, if you want to put it in the show notes.
Yep, that and your link to your website so people can check out all the services we talked about today.
Yeah, so my 2 websites, I got elleturpitt.com, which is my blog, where I review books that aren't horror, and elleturpittediting.com is got all the information. The editing website is linked on my actual website as well. And obviously I'm on Twitter, so if anyone has any questions, they can always shoot me a DM on there as well.
What's your handle?
Elle Turpitt, which is TURLETURPITT. Turpitt is spelled how it's said, basically. Just remember the double T. But Probably if you search Turpitt on there, I'm probably the only one who comes up as well.
Ellen, is there anything? I mean, Helen. We're talking about Ellen.
Ellen.
Rude.
Yeah, I mix them up sometimes because it's literally one letter off. Sorry, Elle. Is there anything else that you want to talk about or let people know?
No, just make sure you read S.H. Cooper's work, Laurel Hightower's work, Gemma Moore's work. They're all amazing authors. Read The Fourth Whore. Check out J. Askew on Twitter as well. That's ASKEW, because her short stories are fantastic. I think she's an author that's going to go really far. I've been working with her for a year now, and every time I get one of her short stories, I'm just like blown away by it. Don't be arseholes, don't be racist, don't be sexist, don't be homophobic. It's really not hard. Read diversely, read diverse books, and once you start doing it, you'll find it a lot easier to do so. I think last count, when I'd read 80, I've almost on track to finish 100 books this year. When I last checked, I'd read 82 books this year, 41 of which, so I took out the anthologies from that 82, and 41 of those books were by women.
Nice.
And that was a mix of, different diverse authors as well. If you're not reading diversely, the only person who's missing out is you. Mm-hmm. So do that. Go check out some diverse books, because, just widen your worldview.
Brendan, you got any final words, sir?
I do not. We even covered where can people follow you. Brilliant.
Well, thank you, Elle, for stopping by. Thank you, Brendan, for joining us again today, and everybody that listened. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Have a good one, guys.
Yeah, you too.
We are in your mind. We are all around. You are now leaving Dead Headspace.